They thought I had nothing left. They sat across from me at that conference table, my son-in-law with his gold cufflinks and his smirk, my daughter with her arms folded like she was already counting square footage, and they genuinely believed I was finished. I want to tell you how I got there, because it didn't happen overnight, and I wasn't always the kind of man who sat quietly in a room full of people who hated him. My name is George Whitfield. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a residential construction company in Central Ohio. Nothing flashy, just solid work. Custom homes mostly, the kind where you hand the family the keys and they cry a little on the front porch. I loved that part. Every single time. My wife passed 11 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. She went fast, which the doctor said was a mercy, and I suppose they were right, though it didn't feel like one. We had one daughter together. I'll call her my daughter, because that's what she was to me, every day of our life until she wasn't. For a few years after her mother died, she and I were close. She'd come by the house on Sundays. We'd watch football. She'd complain about her job. I'd pretend to give advice. Normal stuff. I thought we understood each other. Then she married him. His name is Troy. He sold commercial real estate in Columbus, and he had the kind of confidence that fills a room before he does. The first time I met him, he shook my hand too hard and looked over my shoulder while he did it. I told myself I was being unfair. Protective fathers always think no one is good enough. I swallowed it. They got married on a Saturday in June, 3 years after my wife died. Nice ceremony. I danced with my daughter and she laughed at something I said, and for a few hours I thought everything was going to be fine. It was not going to be fine. It started small. The Sunday visits got shorter. Then they stopped. When I called, she'd pick up distracted, always in the middle of something. Troy's voice in the background, not talking to her, just present. Like a weather system you can feel before you see it. About 18 months into the marriage, they started coming around again. Together this time. Troy would sit in my living room and look at the built-in bookshelves and the crown, molding and the fireplace I'd put in myself and say things like, "This is a lot of house for one person." Not a question, just a statement he'd let hang in the air. My company had done well. I won't pretend otherwise. I had the house, 4 bedrooms, paid off, in a neighborhood that had appreciated significantly over the decades. I had savings. I had a pension from the years before I went independent, and I had the business which still ran, mostly through a project manager I trusted named Lou, while I semi-retired. I was comfortable, and Troy knew exactly what comfortable looked like. He started talking to me about estate planning. Casually at first. "Have you thought about what happens to all this when you're gone?" I told him I had a will. He nodded like I'd said something quaint. "A basic will can be contested," he said. "You really should think about a living trust. Protect your daughter." I thought he was trying to help. He wasn't. Over the next several months, he introduced me to a financial advisor, a friend of his, a man I'll call the advisor, because his license turned out to be worth about as much as the paper it was printed on. This man suggested I restructure things, move certain assets into a joint family trust, for tax purposes, he said. For simplicity, he had charts. He had a very clean office. I was 61 years old, and I had just watched a man in a nice suit tell me that everything I'd built could pass to my daughter more cleanly if I just signed a few documents. I signed them. I am not proud of that, but I want you to understand. I trusted my daughter. I had known her for 37 years. I had sat with her through her mother's last week. I thought signing papers that put her name on things alongside mine was an act of love. It was an act of stupidity. 6 months after I signed, Troy started suggesting I step back from the business. "You've earned it," he'd say. "Let Lou handle it. You should be fishing, Dad." He had started calling me Dad around the time I signed the trust documents. I noticed that. Lou, my project manager, called me one afternoon sounding uncomfortable. He said Troy had come by the office, asked to see the books, said he was helping George get organized. Lou didn't know what to do. He was an employee, not a partner. He let him in. I called Troy that evening. He was smooth about it. Said he was just trying to understand the business in case anything happened to me. "You're not getting any younger," he said, and laughed like it was a joke. I laughed too, but I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long time. I started paying closer attention. What I found over the following weeks was not what I wanted to find. There were withdrawals from the joint trust account I hadn't authorized. Small at first, a few thousand here, a few thousand there, then larger. The advisor had set up the account structure so that both my daughter and I had equal signing authority. I hadn't fully understood that when I signed. I understood it now. I called my daughter. She said Troy handled the finances. She said it like that was a normal thing to say, like she'd handed over that part of her brain along with her maiden name. I didn't push, not yet. I kept watching. What I found next was worse. Troy had approached two of my largest clients, long-term clients, families I'd built homes for who'd referred me to their friends and told them I was retiring, that the company was transitioning, that they should work with a new firm he was associated with going forward. He was using my reputation to walk my clients out the door. Lou confirmed it. He'd heard it from one of the clients directly, a man I'd known for 15 years who called to wish me well in my retirement and was confused when I told him I wasn't retiring. I went very quiet after that call. There is a particular kind of anger that doesn't make noise. It doesn't throw things. It doesn't call people names. It just settles in somewhere below your ribs and gets organized. That's where I was. I called an attorney. Not a family friend, not someone Troy might know. I found one myself, a woman who specialized in elder financial abuse and estate litigation. Her name isn't important. What matters is that she listened to everything I said, and then she said, "This is more common than you think, and there's more you can do than you realize." We started building a case. The first thing she told me was to stop tipping my hand. Don't confront, don't accuse, don't change behavior at all. Keep taking their calls, keep having Sunday dinners when invited. Smile. Be the aging father-in-law who doesn't quite understand how money works. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. There were dinners where Troy sat at my table and talked about our assets and long-term planning for the family, while my daughter passed the bread rolls, and I nodded and said, "That makes sense." There were moments I had to excuse myself to use the bathroom, just to stand at the sink and breathe. But I was also doing other things. I had the trust documents reviewed line by line. My attorney found provisions that had been buried, clauses that gave my daughter's spouse co-authority over trust decisions in the event I was incapacitated. That word, incapacitated. Troy had been laying groundwork. I had my own accounts, ones that predated the trust and had never been included in the restructuring, quietly verified and secured. I worked with my attorney to document every unauthorized withdrawal. We built a paper trail that went back 14 months. I also did something Troy never anticipated. I had a conversation with Lou, a real one. I told him what was happening. I told him what I suspected and what I could prove. Lou had worked for me for 11 years. He went home that night and came back the next morning with printed emails. Emails Troy had sent him directly, asking him to forward client lists, project files, and contractor contacts to a personal email address that had nothing to do with my company. Lou had saved them, everyone. My attorney said, when I handed her that folder, "Mr. Whitfield, I think we're ready." The legal process took 4 months. I won't walk you through every filing because frankly some of it is dry and some of it still makes me tired to think about. But here is what happened, in plain terms. My attorney files for dissolution of the joint trust on grounds of financial elder abuse, a specific legal category in Ohio that carries both civil and criminal implications. She filed a separate civil complaint for tortious interference with business relationships based on Troy's contact with my clients. She also reported the financial advisor to the Ohio Division of Securities, which opened its own investigation. Troy hired an attorney, a good one. I'll give him that. His position was that everything had been done with my knowledge and consent, that I was a full participant in the trust restructuring, and that any business conversations he'd had were informal and familial. We had the emails. We had the bank records. We had 3 client statements from people Troy had contacted, all of whom agreed to testify. And we had something else. About 2 months into the process, my daughter called me. It was late on a Tuesday night. Troy was traveling for work, she said. She'd been going through some things. She sounded like someone who'd been crying for a long time and was past the point where crying helped. She said, "Dad, I didn't know how far it had gone." I believed her. That's the thing. I did believe her. I think she'd been told partial truths for years. I think she'd allowed herself not to ask questions because asking questions would have meant having answers, and some answers change everything. She wasn't innocent exactly, but she wasn't Troy. She agreed to speak with my attorney. What she provided, her own account of conversations between herself and Troy about positioning assets before Dad gets confused, was, according to my attorney, the piece that made the case airtight. The mediation happened on a Thursday morning in February, a conference room in a building downtown Neutral Territory. Troy walked in with his attorney and his cufflinks and a legal pad full of notes. He looked like a man who was used to winning in rooms like that. My daughter sat on my side of the table. The moment Troy registered that, his expression shifted. It was brief, just a flicker, but I had been watching his face for 2 years by then. I saw it. The mediator outlined the claims. Troy's attorney pushed back on several points, firmly and professionally. Then our side presented the documentation, the withdrawals, the client emails, the trust provisions, my daughter's statement. Troy's attorney asked for a recess. They were gone for 40 minutes. When they came back, Troy didn't look at me. He looked at the table and then at his attorney, and then at a point somewhere above all of our heads. The settlement terms, full dissolution of the joint trust with all assets restored to my sole control. Repayment of all unauthorized withdrawals, just under $94,000 in total. A formal cease and desist from any further contact with my business clients. The financial advisor case was handled separately through the securities investigation. He surrendered his license and agreed to a civil judgment. Troy did not face criminal charges. My attorney had advised me that pursuing the criminal track would be a longer, harder road with no guarantee of a different financial outcome, and that the civil resolution was strong. I made the choice to take the settlement. I don't lose sleep over it. What I do think about sometimes is my daughter. She and Troy separated 8 months after the mediation. She didn't tell me directly. I heard it from her cousin. We have spoken since a few times. The conversations are careful. There are things between us that got broken, and I'm not sure how much of it can be put back. I don't know if I want to rush that. I think she has to figure out who she is without him before I can figure out what we are, without all of this in the way. But she called me on my birthday in October. We talked for 40 minutes. She asked about a project I'd taken on. A young couple, first home, smaller than what I used to do, but I wanted to stay in it a little longer. She asked if I still cried when I handed over the keys. I told her I did. She was quiet for a second, then she said, I remember you coming home from those. You always look like someone had given you something. I had to put the phone down for a moment. The house is still mine. The business is still running. Lou is still there, probably keeping things more organized than I ever did. I bought a small fishing boat in the spring, not because Troy suggested it, but because I actually wanted one. I take it out on Saturday mornings when the light is still low and the water is flat, and there's nobody around to want anything from me. Some mornings I think about that conference room, Troy and his legal pad, the moment he saw my daughter sitting across from him. I had been quiet for 2 years, patient in a way I hadn't known I was capable of. I hadn't thrown accusations, hadn't made scenes, hadn't given him anything to use against me. I had just watched and remembered and prepared. The water is very still on Saturday mornings. The coffee is good, and everything I built is exactly where I left it. I think about that February morning more than I probably should. Not with anger. The anger burned off a long time ago, somewhere around the third month of sitting across dinner tables and smiling at a man who was quietly trying to take everything I'd spent 30 years building. What I think about now is simpler than anger. I think about how long it actually takes for consequences to catch up with people who believe they'll never face any. Troy was smart. I want to be honest about that. He didn't come in swinging. He came in patient, methodical, dressed well, speaking the right language. He understood that the easiest way to take something from someone is to make them feel cared for while you're doing it. He studied me. He found the place where I was vulnerable, the grief, the trust, the love for my daughter, and he used it like a tool. For a while, it worked. But here's what he miscalculated. He assumed that because I was quiet, I wasn't watching. He assumed that because I'd handed over signatures, I'd handed over my sense. He confused patience with weakness, and that is a mistake that tends to be expensive. I wasn't a perfect person through any of this. There were moments I doubted myself, wondered if I'd misread things, if I was being a paranoid old man, if pushing back would cost me the relationship with my daughter entirely. That doubt is real, and I won't pretend it wasn't there. But I kept going back to what I actually knew, what I could actually document, what the paper trail actually said. I made myself stay in the facts when the emotions wanted to take over. That discipline, that insistence on knowing what is real before acting on it, was the only thing that kept me from either giving up or blowing up the whole situation too early. What saved me wasn't luck. It was the decision to think clearly when everything in me wanted to react. It was Lou keeping those emails because he understood that something wrong was happening. It was my daughter finding whatever it took to walk into that room and sit on the right side of the table. Good outcomes like that don't fall out of the sky. They're built, quietly, by people who refuse to stop doing the right thing even when no one's watching. I handed over the keys to a young couple's first home last spring. Small house, nothing fancy. They cried on the porch exactly the way people always do. I drove home and sat in my kitchen and thought, this is still mine. This work, this life. The person who tried to take it is somewhere else now, living with whatever that costs him. I don't need to know how that turns out. I already know how mine did.